At one point, Carol describes having purple sand in a story is a bad episode of Star Trek, and I take issue with that because, as we all know, sand is a Star Wars thing. It's coarse, and it gets everywhere. Hello, interwebs. Sorry for that stupid joke, but welcome to my review of the 2-episode series premiere of the Apple Plus TV show Pluribus. I have been really excited to get into this show ever since I heard it was announced. I mean, it's Vince Gilligan, who many people know from his time on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, finally returning to do some science fiction, which kind of started off his career, considering he began... he might have been doing something before it, but he really kind of came onto the scene with The X-Files. So, and also, at the same time, he's bringing in Rhea Shehorn. I'm probably mispronouncing her name. I think that's how you say her name, but from Better Call Saul. I adore her. She is so freaking good in that show, and getting to finally centralize her, though she was pretty much a main character in Better Call Saul, but to really just give her the headline of a show, pretty much the whole show is carried on her, made me very excited because she was just phenomenal. And I have to say, also on top of that, just the pitch of this show is completely my shit. Not only is it science fiction, but it is, and spoilers for the show, just on the concept level, they've kind of kept a decent amount of what this show is under wraps, but even the opening scene of the episode kind of gives away the game a little bit in terms of the concept, so just letting you know right up front. But the basic pitch of this show is, what if Invasion of the Body Snatchers actually won? What if the Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, the one with Leonard Nimoy, we actually got to see further into that and what actually happens when everyone becomes a hive mind and there's only a few people left who are their own individual selves. And that's just such a cool idea on multiple levels. I have always been a big fan of Invasion of the Body Snatchers because it gets at these concepts of hegemony and assimilationism. And obviously the original movie was very much dealing with concepts of is it McCarthyism? Is it communism that we're fearing? It's kind of could be used as a nebulous metaphor for both, which is probably kind of what became so popular. I say this as someone who is more on the left side of the spectrum, but it was an interesting, ambiguous metaphor for hegemony and assimilationism that could be put onto either of these sort of, larger fears that were underlying a lot of America at the time. Same thing with Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, which is very much dealing with fear of government. But here in this show, what I really like that they're doing, and I'll start getting to specifics in a minute, I promise, it's very much Vince Gilligan dealing with some COVID anxiety, this sense of fear of cultural hegemony, of why am I blanking on the words? Echo chambers sort of things. It's just dealing with a lot of these same overlapping things, but in an indirect way that we've all been kind of feeling in the past years, in a way that's very similar to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but now everyone feels isolated even more than at the time of those original movies. So it's tapping into the same ideas, but hitting on those same themes. But what I loved most about the show is there's little undercurrents throughout this that hint at a very, you're all going to laugh at me. I swear to God, I have a reason where I'm going with this, but a very, queer ethos. So when I say queer, and I've talked about this before in some of my main videos, when I say queer, I don't ever really mean queer as about sexuality or being gay or straight or whatever, even though Carol is a queer character. We'll talk, she is a lesbian character as we see in the episode. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it is dealing with these themes of being someone who is outside the larger norm of the society and how they feel like they don't fit in, and how they push back against it and rage against the machine, this consciousness that everyone seems to have, and wanting to articulate what they feel is best, and no one wants to listen to them. In fact, they're very antagonistic to them. And I really like, and especially as we see in the second episode of the shows we'll get into, and I just feel like that hits me really hard, as someone who is very much trying to talk about class consciousness and all of these other things as a very political YouTuber. It hits me in that way. And I'm sure there are other anxieties and things that other people feel too, in that sort of cool open metaphor kind of way that this hits on for folks as well. So I just think there's so many levels that this is working on that I really enjoy. That all being said, let me reel it back in a little bit to kind of talk about not just the overall themes, but actually some of the storytelling going on here, because I will admit, especially with the first episode, there are a couple things in it that are things that I didn't love. There are a couple tropes that I didn't enjoy, but they're not like deal breakers for me, but the things are like, this is kind of a little bit of a lazy way to start off the show. And then once we got into the actual meat and potatoes of what the show is, I was really enjoying it, especially on the second episode. But the first episode kind of hit me in just a few things that I'm just like, man, wish we could have done a little bit better with that. The first one is we meet Carol, and we learn that she's a historical fiction romance author. And she kind of looks down on this. She's like, I hate this. All the people who read my own work are idiots. And that's kind of a character background trope that I don't really like. I've seen that before. We've seen the romantasy novels are so shitty and schlocky that even the people who write them know they're just writing bargain, like basement barrel stuff. And I feel like that is a very just kind of very easy way to go of romance stuff, things mostly for women are stupid and dumb. And it's just again, that's not the main point of the show, but it's just a little bit of a trope that rubbed me of I wish we could do something better than this. And then the other one that got me, and this is going to be my other major criticism, then we can move into much more positive. So I just want to make sure I'm being very clear that these are not deal breakers, but just kind of my nits to pick a little bit here. But we do have a bury your gays storyline right in the beginning where Carol's partner, I don't know if she was her wife or not, but certainly partner, and they've been together a very long time, dies. And that's sort of very much like an impetus for a part of the reason why Carol is so antagonistic to this hive mind that gets created out of humanity. And I think, I'm not going to... I've had this argument before with people. It kind of came up recently with Star Wars Andor about we can do bury your gay storylines because we have other gay characters and things like that. And I want to be very clear. I am not someone who is saying, you can never kill gay characters. I've had this argument before. I don't want to get it, do a whole breakdown of it. But for me, the problem with bury your gays is when you're doing that trope in a way that is very tropey, right? Very kind of lazy and just using it as a storytelling device without lever, analyzing it, doing anything interesting with it, or kind of just using it in the way that it's always been used for, and not really recognizing the larger culture that's we're in, especially in right now, that is very anti-gay, anti-queer, just generally speaking, anti-trans. And so it's just a trope that I don't love. Again, it's just a minor thing in this show that I really overall like. But it's just you're having in this episode quite literally a queer character getting killed to motivate her partner. So it's a fridging of a wife, and then also a bury your gay storyline on top of that to give a little bit of extra trauma spice to our main character. And it's just do we need to do that? Again, not a deal breaker. It's just something that, and for you, maybe it's not even a big deal at all. But for me, it's just one of those man, that's a little disappointing. Beyond that, though, everything else here, those were my two biggest nits to pick. Everything else here was really, really fascinating. I really liked the depiction of a lot of this. I mean, obviously we're using a lot of very horror movie kind of pandemic, invasion, almost zombie-esque kind of imagery. I mean, I think the opening where we have Carol sort of running away from the hospital in the car and even getting to the hospital was very reminiscent of stuff like The Last of Us. I'm thinking of the video game, if you ever played the video game The Last of Us, that opening sequence where you're in the car, in that game. In fact, I would be shocked if Vince Gillian did not use that as a comp when they were sort of planning out the shots and stuff for the episode, because it was very, very similar and very, very reminiscent, which I liked. I thought that was very good because, again, it is dealing with this post-apocalyptic, but it's kind of turning it on its head in it's a utopia maybe ? And I found that to be kind of fascinating. The other things that I like here, getting into the queer themes that I was talking about before, and when I say queer again, I mean anti-cultural hegemony kind of themes. I use queer as a shorthand because it's my perspective as a queer person, but you can slot in a different word for it as well. But there are a couple small bits in here that I really, really liked. For example, when in the second episode, Carol learns that the woman who has come to speak to her is the female version of her character from her book, the male sort of romance character from her book. I really loved that because she says, I told my girlfriend, I forget her partner's name, that I never told anybody that we wanted to make the character a woman, but I made her a boy. And that speaks to this idea, right, of, someone acquiescing to the cultural norms, to the hegemony. Like, she actively chose, because she wanted to sell something better, because she knew it probably would not sell as well, or not be seen as well, or not be taken as well, to just make it a heteronormative romance novel. She sanded off her own identity to fit into the hegemony to sell her book, because that's what culture told her to do, told her to fit in that way. And that's using a queer theme in a really subtle way to just sort of hint at like some of the larger meanings of what the show is getting at about cultural hegemony, and how everyone sort of is just fitting into a norm. And I like that, because it makes this show, to me, speaking to, and I really agree with Carol here, is that like this is in large part like death. Like, if you there's another story that I kind of want to bring up here, because I just read it recently. I'm reading the Children of Time books by Adrian Tarkovsky. Fantastic novels if you have not read them all. There's 3, there's a 4th one on the way. But this one reminds me a lot about like what his themes are in those books, and especially, I won't spoil it for you, but the second book in the series, Children of Ruin, there's a very similar kind of thing going on there. But overall, his books are very much about the theme of getting to understand the other, and how getting to understand the other actually teaches us about ourselves. And when you have a culture that is all just one thing, that is not adding anything new, and not relating to anything new, then it just stagnates. And I'm really hoping the show kind of talks about that a little bit more, because we get into some of the debates in the second episode, where she meets some of the other people who are still individuals in this world. And, she's kind of arguing like, oh, they're like heroin addicts. Oh, you see, this is like, they're all mind bots and they're all being controlled. And, she even compares at the end at one point, like this like, oh, you're just like a harem. You're fine being sex bots or whatever, for this guy. And everyone's sort of resistant to that. It's like, look, there's peace on earth. There's, everything seems to be fine. We get to have fun. Our family members are still here. I kind of want to join it too. Like some of them even say, because it seems happier. They're more at peace. But again, there's like, what's art going to be? What is humanity going to become? Once we all sort of glom together, what are we making? What are we creating? There's no diversity. Again, it's why I have infinite diversity and infinite combinations written on my, tattooed on me from Star Trek, because I truly believe in these ideas of multiculturalism makes us better. You could make everyone a hegemony, and if you could make that like perfect fascistic kind of world where everyone's just the ubermensch perfect human being or whatever. I'm not saying this show's like very clearly like color your skin doesn't matter. It's not like directly tying it to fascism, but that sort of idea of like this utopia where everyone's exactly the same, everyone exists the same, no one has any like friction or anything like that. It creates death in my mind, stagnation. You're not changing, and life is change. Time only, if you look into physics, time only exists because things change. The universe only exists because change happens. And so, life is change, and if you're all the same, if everyone's just the same, there's no life. And I really hope that those are some of the themes that this gets into, that in a way that I'm excited to see. I mean, I'm trying to still talk. I keep coming back into thematic stuff because, again, that's some of the stuff that really interests me. But there is some moment-to-moment things here that I really like Carol getting a call from not the president, but the agricultural guy. And like the numbers, the ticker on the screen is like, everything's going to be fine. Give us a call. It's like all of that stuff is really great. I love that. And I also, some other things of like, Carol, when she directs her negative emotions at the sort of mind being, I don't even know, humanity, I guess, the mind virus humanity thing, it causes them to have seizures, and she literally kills like 11 million people when she does that, and she feels a sense of guilt. And again, I'm going to tie it back into themes, but it's this thing of like, oh, when you're like fighting for autonomy and like people getting killed, it's like, it's your fault. But again, it's like, it's not her fault for being able to feel her emotions and like pushing back against these people. And like, yes, she's venting it, but like she's in a negative place and like she's feeling all this guilt for something that is not really her fault. And it even comes up at another point too, where like, she even talks about, oh, the military, she just like says like, how many people died when you did this? And they're like, oh, well, we had to do it. It's an imperative for us. And they like got 8 million people killed when they did it, and they may regret it. But again, they didn't have to do that. So there is this sort of like element of like, oh, you're being blamed for what this other thing did, which I find kind of a fascinating idea to play with. But again, she's being blamed for it from all of the other people, understandably so, especially that one lady whose father got killed when, she was in the car when the seizures happened. And she understandably blames Carol. But again, not really Carol's fault. She didn't know that that was going to be the effect of her actions. Hell, no one really probably even knew. And so I think that there's some really cool stuff about like bodily autonomy, victim blaming, all of these different things within this that I think is really, really fascinating. And also the other element of this too that's kind of being brought up as well is the idea of like harm and what is harm and choice and autonomy, because the humanity, I don't know what to call it, the humanity mind hegemony, whatever you want to call it, the Borg, we'll call them the Borg. They don't seem to have any desire for autonomy themselves. Like at the end, I don't know his name, but the guy who rode in on Air Force One, which is very funny, he's like, have I done anything towards you? No. And then pirate lady says, I can't make a choice. And Helen literally is like, you could choose to tell us both to fuck off. And they can't cause them emotional pain. And again, this sense of autonomy and who gets to have identity within this. Because like she's technically one being, but she's part of this greater whole. So what does the greater whole care if one cell in its body, has sex with this guy repeatedly over and over and over and over again? But with that one person whose body that guy's having sex with wanted that. And would she want that, her body to be having sex in that way? And I find that, again, that sort of like, okay, but what counts as autonomy? If the whole thing is giving autonomy, sure. But she didn't consent to getting the virus put in her. She didn't consent to her, her body being used in this way. But now she's part of this other thing, and consent is seemingly taken for granted. And so, yeah, and there's, again, the veganism element of this is really cool too, because we're talking about like animals who rightfully should be set free, and the way we treat animals is awful, and we cage them and we eat them. And so there's discussions of that as well. So all of that is just ultimately really, really fascinating. And this is just me speculating at this point, and I have a bet that where the show is going to be going in a larger sense, is that like the signal that we got from the aliens at the beginning of this is there's a larger hegemony that humanity's going to try and link up with, and then they all become part of the larger alien hegemony, and it just, again, death, more and more death, because the individual, even the cultural identity of humanity as a whole will get subsumed into this larger thing, and there'll be nothing new created. And I think that that's a fascinating idea. And I really think what's going to be cool about seeing this show be a show, because I think one of the big dangers with this is ultimately it could be a show that could lose steam really quickly of like, how can you keep this going? But I do think there's so many interesting ideas within this concept, and honestly could just go to wild bonkers places if you keep just going further and further out, like years out, decades out, getting the new alien species thing in here out. Like, how does Carol, hint at that, like affect it? And the other thing too, there was another small moment here in the first episode that I really liked that I'll kind of end on, is there's this moment where they're talking about like, she hates her fantasy novels, and her partner says, well, if you just make one person happy, I think that's good. And that means something. Well, what if the thing is reversed? What if you make someone miserable? Does that mean something? Because this mind Borg humanity can't really feel sadness or being upset. It can't make choices, and Carol's going to confront it on that. And maybe that's worthwhile, and I think that is a really fascinating idea. So there's just so many places that this could go, and I could see this losing steam real quick, but I also could see it being used to explore some really cool ideas. I also think it could be a lot of fun. Again, the Air Force One thing is a really fun idea. All of I just think you could do some fun things with this as like the last man on Earth kind of vibe, last woman on Earth kind of vibe. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. So what did you think about the first two episodes of Pluribus, or Plur-one-bus, I guess is kind of also what it could be called. If you look at the posters, there's like a 1 in there for the eye. I'd love to hear all your comments down below. But beyond all that, I hope you, my friends, live long and prosper.